Today's episode of the Nick Taylor Horror Show is brought to you by Diabolic DVD. For almost 20 years, Diabolic DVD has been the source for horror, cult, and weird cinema to customers around the world. Diabolic offers a one-stop shopping experience for all of your favorite labels, including Arrow, Synapse, Vinegar Syndrome, Severin, Mondo Macabro, Blue Underground, 88, and many more from all corners of the globe. So whether you're looking for the definitive version of Suspiria or trying to upgrade your crusty old DVD of Cannibal Holocaust, Diabolic is the owner-operated small business choice you've been craving. Shop online at diabolicdvd.com. That's DIABOLIK DVD.com. Welcome back to the Nick Taylor Horror Show. Steve Niles is an American comic book writer, novelist, screenwriter, and producer with a prolific portfolio of groundbreaking horror comics, including Criminal Macabre, Ash and the Army of Darkness, Batman, Gotham County Line, Ghosts of Krypton, which is a Superman adventure, and October Faction, upon which the Netflix show is based. Steve also wrote the original comic and adapted the screenplay for 30 Days of Night, among many, many other things. Steve is also the co-founder of Monster Forge, an extremely exciting new production house specializing in monster-centric projects that extends across film, animation, games, comics, and even toys. Steve co-founded Monster Forge with Shannon, Eric, Denton, and I actually got to speak to both of them about Monster Forge back on episode 67, so be sure and check that out as well. Steve is a legend in the world of horror and comics, and someone I am a big, big admirer of. I was extremely excited to talk to him all about his career history, his writing and creative processes, and his favorite new movies and comics. Please enjoy this conversation with Steve Niles. Steve Niles, how's it going?
Good. How you doing?
I'm doing good, thanks. Really, really good. I'm always impressed by your Frankenstein collection. Has that been going strong for a long time?
Oh, yeah. I mean, like my whole life, I've been collecting them. So, but it wasn't until recently that I actually had a place to put them. They've all been in boxes for years, and we just recently got an office finally.
Oh, nice.
So, turned it into my little nerd den.
Yeah, I got one of those myself. Yeah, I feel like everybody has a favorite universal monster. Clearly Frankenstein's yours, right?
Yeah, without a doubt.
Nice,
Love
nice.
It. I also have a creature collection and scattered. I have Dracula and the rest of the guys, but most of it's Frankenstein.
Nice, nice. Yeah, I think Creature is probably my favorite. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's one of the more beautiful of the movies, but also the creature design was one of the first really expansive creature suits. And it was designed by I forgot her name. It was there was a whole book about the woman who designed it. What?
Yeah. Millicent Patrick.
That's right. I knew it was Millicent somebody. Yeah. That's a documentary I'd love to see made because she was a woman, they didn't give her the credit, and she was one of the like premier effects artists, you know. Pretty extraordinary story. Yeah.
Also created the mutant from This Island Earth.
Oh wow. Oh, I didn't know that. That's super cool.
Yeah.
She definitely deserves a documentary. So one thing that I find really fascinating about you as a writer is, I mean, you have a very prolific history. And one thing that I noted that you had said in a previous interview is that you never took writing classes. You learned to write by reading. And I feel like that's a huge concept. And I feel like there's a lot of aspiring writers out there, but can you kind of talk about how your writing education manifested itself? Like how selective were you with what you read, and what was your reading diet looking like? And how did that contribute to your ability as a writer?
Oh, it's rough because I was a terrible student. I absolutely hated school and didn't pay any attention. But I'd be reading my own books. I wouldn't pay any attention to Red Badge of Courage, but I'd be in the back of the classroom reading I Am Legend.
Nice.
So everything with me has been very self-taught. I I really feel like the way I got started was a great education, because when I first started out, even though I was writing my own stuff, the published work was adapting Clive Barker, adapting Richard Matheson, adapting Harlan Ellison. And I learned, just how to tell a story by adapting great writers, into comics. So that really taught me a lot. But mainly my education, if you want to call it that, has been through reading. Just reading other people's work. Devouring comic books my whole life. Devouring novels, watching every movie I could get my hands on. So you just kind of fuel yourself that way.
Yeah. And I feel like when it comes to writing, there's, writer ability, how good you are at things like dialogue and description and whatnot. But then there's also this more nebulous notion of just good storytelling. And I'm curious, how did you develop your storytelling ability? Do you ever return to the works of people like Joseph Campbell or anyone like that to kind of help you figure these things out? Any mythological archetypes, or how do you develop your sense of story?
I don't really, I go back to my favorites, which are like Richard Matheson. He's just such a perfect storyteller. And, I love his style. So I will go back to that at some point. But honestly, a lot of it is it's just practice and instinct that a lot of it comes through, and also, paying attention to real life, listening to the way people talk, things like that. Because that's one of the things I've always tried to do, is have very, good dialogue, good, accurate dialogue. Really enjoy it with stuff like Cal McDonald, Criminal Macabre. It's very dialogue heavy. And so I get a kick out of that.
What is the world building process like for you? Do you ever, because clearly with a lot of the worlds that you've created, they have their own laws and rules and things like that, particularly when it comes to elements of supernatural and whatnot. Do you start with like any kind of a story Bible, or is there any canonical work that you create before you start building a world?
I will, basically, the last world building experience I had was doing October Faction. Right. And what I do is I start with characters, then I work in the story, and it's all about layering. You keep, like I said, building. It's about world building. And it's sort of a slow process at first, because I think October Faction started out as a paragraph. And then I expanded it to 5 graphic novels. Yeah. So it's all, for me, at least part of my process is I'm constantly trying to layer in new stuff.
Interesting. Yeah. When it comes to projects, there's when it comes to writing, it can be a very arduous, difficult journey. A lot of twists and turns, a lot of banging your head against the wall. And I'm sure there's a lot of emphasis on not giving up, on finishing whatever it is you're writing. But that being said, as a writer, I'm sure sometimes you run into walls that are impenetrable. So I'm curious, at what point will you abandon a project?
I have a file just called miscellaneous stuff, and it's nothing but unfinished short stories, scripts, things that, for whatever reason, you just, you get that energy up, you get a vision, you start writing it, and then, like you said, you just, bam, you hit a wall. Yeah. Suddenly, you don't have an ending, you don't have a beat plot, so what I do is I slide it away, I put it in that file. There's a lot of Cal McDonald stories in there that I started. And then, I revisit them later. Yeah. Because I really think it's just my state of mind at the time, I'm sure. So I'll revisit them later, see what they trigger. A lot of times they trigger great stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm sure there's you can kind of take the sawdust from one project and apply it to another one. If, a character from some project that never made it, or a detail or something, I'm sure you can just repurpose all of that for, other stuff that you're working on, I would imagine.
Absolutely. I did a couple science fiction things over the last year. I did The Disciples, a thing called Graveyard Moon, and there's another one that I can't think of that I did with Nat Jones, Delta 13.
Oh, wow.
started as one story.
Whoa.
And then I just sort of cannibalized it into different, I just took like different elements and built those, you know, but yeah. I definitely, you know, I save everything unless I'd say once or twice in my life, I've just thrown things away completely. But for the most part, I save everything because you just never know. You never know what you're going to, when you revisit it, what ideas will come.
Yeah. And as far as saving everything, I mean, I'm sure throughout the course of a given week, you are just bombarded with things that are inspirational for either a piece or something that you want to write, or nowadays in a movie idea. How do you, and I'm like, usually when inspiration strikes, it's not all at once. It's just a little element here, a little element there. You see an image that's inspirational or a piece of music or something. What is like your capture system for just keeping track of all these little things that could just kind of spark ideas for writing or for other projects?
Yeah. And I was going to say, when I was younger, I used to do these bizarre charts. Like little circles. I would write the character name, then they would connect to another circle that had a location. And somehow I would be able to go back to these things and figure out what the hell I was talking about. Then I used to do a lot of stuff where if I got an idea, I just dive in, start writing. Now in my old age, I get the inspiration and I write an outline and I pound it out. I pound out every detail before I start writing now, which has helped me incredibly. I don't do it with prose. I only do it with comics. But mapping out the story beforehand, and it's any little thing, because sometimes, you know, you get a piece of dialogue that'll get you started.
Yeah.
So every little detail I can in that outline, then I back up and I start scripting.
Oh, all right. And to get really nerdy, what does your outlining process look like? Do you have a board with cards on it where you keep track of, you know, details and story beats, or is it a matter of just sitting down in a Word doc?
I have done that. I have the wall of Post-its, you know, it looks like a serial killer's house.
Yep.
I've done that. But for the most part, it's just on the typewriter, on my computer, and just pounding it out. You know, almost like a short story, because a lot of times I get a little flowery in my outline. I'll actually pull that stuff and use it for captions.
Oh, okay. Got it.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. And you played in a punk band earlier in your life. So how did punk rock contribute to your overall artistic style and sensibility as an artist? Because it's usually pretty integral for a lot of people who are fans, particularly people who are in punk bands.
Well, it's funny, you know, one of the things I learned from, you know, playing in a punk band, you know, we did everything ourselves.
Right.
You know, we put our own shows, we put out our own records, we booked our own tours.
Right.
So when I started thinking about doing comic books and writing, I didn't sit around, I didn't submit to anybody. I didn't even think. It took me years to realize that, I might want to talk to some editors.
Right.
I just dove in just like we did with the punk bands, you know. It's a very DIY attitude that I got from punk. I don't know. I've heard, you know, David Slade, actually, the director of 30 Days a Night, has told me and wrote in an introduction that he considers 30 Days a Night a very punk rock book. And I believe him, but I don't see it. I don't quite see it the way you know, he sees it.
It's subconscious.
A very aggressive book. I know that, but you know, I'd say most of the way it has affected me is in how I approach doing work.
Yeah, you know? Just getting in there and doing it.
I firmly believe in don't sit around waiting for people's permission. If you sit around waiting for people's permission, you'll be waiting your whole life. Yeah. So, you know, just get out there and do it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's how you got your initial graphic novels out, by starting your own publishing company, right? Your own graphic novel publishing company, instead of waiting for an opportunity. Eric Powell did the same thing when he first put out The Goon, which is, I think it seems like that's how you get the most subversive, interesting work out there. You have to just do it on your own.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, I started out that way, and, you know, I had a lot of success. on the creative side. I wrote a lot of people. That's how I wound up getting, the rights to I Am Legend from Matheson, and half the rights to the Books of Blood. It was, it was sort of this punk rock enthusiasm that I just threw out there. But it was always that DIY attitude. I mean, you got to, because you just can't sit around waiting for people. At the same time, one of the things I always say to young up and coming writers is to, go to conventions, meet editors, because editors are the ones who are going to get you in, especially if you want to do DC Marvel kind of thing. Those are the people you want, you do want to talk to and become friends with, because I have a lot of young writers who approach other writers, and I'm like, well, they're trying to survive and get their own stuff published. It's the editors. They're the guys giving you jobs. They're the ones you want to talk to. Okay,
that makes a lot of sense. And do you abide by any sort of, in terms of your writing practice, do you have any sort of a daily minimum, like in a Stephen King 2,000 words sort of a way? Do you ever quantify your writing?
I try to, if it's a comic, I feel good if I got 5 or 10 pages done. For comic pages. With prose, I think Stephen King's 2,000 per day is very reachable. That can be done. So I actually just got done writing 2 new short stories for a Criminal Macabre collection that's coming out.
Oh, nice.
And I found myself doing that. Like, okay, 2,000 words a day, you're good. So setting those goals I think it's important.
Yeah, because it makes it manageable. Otherwise, if you just have the overwhelming task of writing something or finishing something, your brain our little monkey brains just can't handle it.
Exactly. So, it's like anything else, baby steps.
Right. So one thing I did want to return to was the notion of, punk rock in terms of basically empowering yourself to go do things and get things done. So I'm wondering, how has that manifested itself into the DNA of Monster Forge now that you guys are a relatively new company and working on a multitude of different projects? How is the punk rock ethos manifesting itself into the company culture and you guys' way of doing things at Monster Forge?
One thing that's coming out of it that I would say is very punk rock to me is letting people have their own voice, letting people. I'm not interested in getting scripts and tearing them apart and making them how I want to make them. I'm more interested in nurturing the property so that the person who's created it is happy. So I it's sort of that anti-corporate idea. I'm not interested in, molding people and forcing them into into this whole I've created. I'm really interested in pursuing other people's visions. And it's been really interesting so far. The submissions we've gotten, I'm still reading all the time. And we've got some really interesting projects going as a result of that. Just sort of backing off, letting the project speak for itself,
Yeah, and I feel like it's so important, particularly now with so many producers are overly concerned with numbers and what's trending and, zombies are hot. We got to do something with zombies. But you're nowadays, I think, just with the ubiquity of streaming, and it just seems like it's easier for filmmakers to get their movies off the ground now. Although there's the added challenge of there being so many more films out there, but we're seeing a lot more unique voices, and it sounds like you guys are really dedicated to authentic voices nowadays. Is that accurate?
That's very accurate. Like I said, I'm not interested in molding things to my vision. I'm really interested in discovering other people's visions and seeing it through, nurturing those. Yeah.
So one of the things that the nerd in me was really excited about when it came to Monster Forge was the fact that you guys are working with James Groman.
Nice. Yeah. I met him through Shannon, and I'm really enjoying this process because we're sort of throwing some ideas at him, and he's coming back with sketches and stuff. But hopefully we're going to be making an announcement with him fairly soon.
Oh, okay. Got it. So it's all under wraps right now, it sounds like.
Yeah, right now nothing's official.
Gotcha. Cool. Are there any projects that you guys are at liberty to talk about now, or are things still kind of under wraps?
what we're doing right now is, like I said, well, we're going through a lot of properties. We're trying to read everything. We're trying to get it organized. We have 3 or 4 things now that we are ready to take out and pitch.
Very cool.
But not talk.
Got it.
If we sell a pitch, we will make announcements galore.
Mm-hmm.
But for right now, everything's just still very much in the pitch stage.
Gotcha. And I know you had collaborated with Rob Zombie in the past. Is there any chance of him potentially joining forces with you again anytime soon with Monster Forge?
I have not talked to Rob for years, but he's very much, he likes to do his own thing. He really does. I mean, we only did 2 books together, or 2 series. And it was a blast. I've worked with a lot of people, and he was one of the first people that I worked with where we were literally like, I would type 5 pages, send it to him. He'd type 5 pages, send it back. And we're like playing hot potato with a script. So he was really fun to work with and stuff. But yeah, as far as Monster Forge, I haven't had that conversation yet.
Okay, gotcha. And having worked with people like Rob Zombie, like Clive Barker, like a lot of, incredible other creatives, were there any big major creative lessons that you learned from some of the legends that you've worked with that carry into your work these days?
Barker and Matheson, George Romero, John Carpenter, all these guys that have really left an impression on me. It's the simplicity. They don't overcomplicate things. They stress character. They do these things that I really like. And, that's been one of the biggest lessons I learned, because when I started out writing, I was very high concept.
Yeah.
It was all like, meteor's going to hit the Earth. And then I would forget, like, oh, yeah, the Earth has millions of people on it. Let's talk about the characters and people affected by these things. And especially with horror, I've just really enjoyed that. That's something Stephen King is just a master at, establishing the characters, and then putting them through horrible things. But you've got to empathize.
Yeah.
So that was a big one for me.
Yeah. I feel like it's easy to get stuck in the trap of concept, particularly if you're doing anything horror, sci-fi related, whereas it's easy to forget about characters. I mean, nothing drives me crazier than seeing a horror movie where the concept is enormous, but there's no care paid to writing the characters at all.
Yeah, well, it's like, 30 Days a Night. The high concept was vampires invade a town in Alaska. Mm-hmm. But the real story that came out of the comic was a love story between these 2 sheriffs,
right?
This couple. So I wound up finding the characters and emphasizing that. Everybody pays attention to the high concept, but to me, 30 Days has always been this weird little love story. Yeah. How did that present itself? Was that just through exploring the characters, and then the love story kind of found its way to the surface of the story? Yeah, they wrote themselves. Evan and Stella just sort of, as soon as I started writing them, their dialogue came to me, their relationship, became very obvious. One of the things I wanted to do, in the movie, they have problems. Mm-hmm. In the comic, they're absolutely in love from beginning to end. Yeah. And that was something I really wanted to do. But for the movie, they wanted some conflict. They wanted, some things like that. But, for me, 30 Days was an exercise in trying to take the high concept and injecting characters into it. Yeah. And it was originally supposed to be, you were pitching it as a movie initially, and studios were turning their back on it, but then you made the graphic novel, and then they got interested, which I thought was interesting because it kind of having such a developed proof of concept, it sounds like that really helped get it made. Well, I think, it was one of those things that took me a while to realize, because what I would do is I would pitch, I'm like, and then, these vampires are coming across the frozen tundra. And I just realized, vampires basically meant Bela Lugosi at that point. I mean, it meant Buffy and Twilight. But that's what I realized, my pitch sounded like I was talking about a bunch of guys in capes running across the snow. Right. I was like, no. And then, once they saw the comic, they're like, oh my God, these vampires are feral. They're not romantic, and all these things that came out in the comic that frankly, that wasn't in the pitch. Right. The pitch was purely high concept.
But it's smart creating a graphic novel. I mean, I'm sure it wasn't just for the sake of, pitching the movie, but utilizing the graphic novel as a format to just dimensionalize your story prior to pitching to turn it into a movie probably really helps, because it just strengthens all the ideas and all of that. So it's an interesting idea.
Yeah, it really did. And, the thing was, when Ben and I did 30 Days a Night, it was a freebie. We didn't get paid. Mm-hmm. It was just one of those opportunities. We were working for Todd McFarlane at the time, and Ted Adams contacted us and just said, "We can't pay you, but you can do whatever you want."
Good deal.
So, one thing led to another, and we wound up, working on 30 days. And at the point, it was a paragraph. And that's it. And so I had to attack it. And, I knew I wanted it to be 3 issues, or, 1 issue per act. But I didn't know much when I was starting out on that.
Yeah. Yeah. So one thing, a lot of writers kind of have their editor, and I don't mean their actual editor, but somebody who they show their work to if they're either not sure about it or whose opinion they really trust to kind of help bring the story together. For Stephen King, it's his wife. But do you have anybody or any sort of process, like any group of people that you'll send your work to, or how do you?
Yeah. Well, Monica, my wife, is my, she reads everything I write. Mm-hmm. And she's very honest, which I really love. She doesn't let me get away with anything. With finished products, what I will send to my friend Rick Remender. Mm-hmm. He and I are always showing each other what we're working on and stuff. And he's just doing gangbusters these days. So I'll show him. Sometimes Mark Miller, because he's a trusted friend. I've known him for years. And that's really it. It's a very small audience. It's really my poor wife. She reads everything I write.
That's awesome. So when it comes to writing, there's a lot of books on the topic, a lot of courses you can take, a lot of which are not really worthwhile. But were there any resources that were formidable for you as a writer, whether they be specific books or anything, or was it just a matter of reading?
I'm terrible.
What?
I'm just terrible. It's just reading. It's just reading for me. I try to read books on writing and stuff. Actually, Stephen King's On Writing is probably my favorite.
Yeah, it's a great one.
It's a great one. And I just love the way he tells the story. It's about experience. It's not about do this, do that.
Right.
I've always loved his attitude anyway. You just shove a desk in a corner and start writing. Mm-hmm. This is a great attitude. But yeah, no, I've been horrible. I'm a horrible student. When it comes to doing my homework. So luckily I like to read and watch movies and all these things where I just sort of, I absorb, ideas, but yeah.
Cool. Well, last kind of nerdy self-serving question. I'm sure you have to absorb a lot of content these days between movies and TV shows. I'm sure you're watching a whole lot and reading, comics and novels. Is anything recently that's come out really grabbed your attention? Either movie, comic, novel, anything in the horror genre that's really broken through the surface for you?
For the horror genre, movies have been pretty slim pickings.
Yeah.
The last ones that I really liked were like Hereditary and the other one he did.
Midsommar.
Thank you. Midsommar. I really enjoyed those. Comic-wise, have you read Philadelphia yet?
No, I've heard of it though.
Check it out. Check it out. It's really Rodney Barnes and Jason Sean Alexander. They're just knocking it out of the park. They're doing great stuff. It's not horror, but I got to plug my friend Rick Remender. His new book, Scumbag, is freaking hilarious.
Okay.
It's pure Rick. It's just pure Rick. So I'd recommend checking that out.
Okay, definitely.
TV and TV, pretty pedestrian lately. I've been watching WandaVision. Mm-hmm. For as much of a horror guy as I am, I do love the Marvel movies.
Yeah.
Most they pick at that childhood memory. This is the stuff I grew up on.
Yeah.
So it totally plugs into that. Mm-hmm. But that's kind of it right now. Mostly I've been reading so many scripts. That's been my life lately.
Yeah. Gotcha. Well, Steve, this is a whole lot of fun. Thank you so much for taking the time. Any parting wisdom for those aspiring writers out there?
Well, like I said, don't wait for anybody. Just there's no reason that you start writing. Just start, getting out there, meeting people, doing what, if you have to publish it yourself, publish it yourself.
Right.
Just don't sit around waiting, or you will be waiting your whole life.
Very wise words. Thank you again.
Great. Thank you so much.
All right, here as always are some key takeaways from this conversation with Steve Niles. Number 1, save everything. Considering the fact that he is such a prolific creator, Steve is always writing and frequently working on multiple projects simultaneously. Therefore, his mind is always coming up with ideas for his many projects, which is why he has a system for capturing ideas as they come to him, so that when it comes time to write, he can face the page with a backlog of material to start from. Whether you're an Evernote power user, a scrapbook keeper, or simply using the Notes app on your iPhone, it's critical that you give yourself permission to be a hoarder of ideas. As a creator, your ideas will rarely come to you fully formed, and instead usually show up as small, disparate details that are looking to be developed. This is why you will want to begin capturing all of this material as it comes to you, so that you can arm yourself against writer's block with a wealth of concepts that can be molded to fit your current projects. Number 2, heed the punk rock ethos of DIY. Few directors have cited that punk rock is a crucial inspiration and has been crucially inspirational for their entire approach to filmmaking, including Larry Fessenden. Steve is no exception to this idea. Having played in multiple punk bands like Grey Matter and 3, Steve was imbued with the DIY, which stands for do-it-yourself, ethos of punk rock at a very early age, and it completely dictated his career approach. In a nutshell, the DIY punk ethos states that you should never wait for any larger entity to give you an opportunity, but instead create your own opportunities entirely by creating your own platforms, and by doing as much yourself as possible. This came about primarily in the 70s and 80s, when a ton of punk bands couldn't get signed by mainstream labels, forcing them to launch their own labels out of necessity. Similarly, Steve's early graphic novel work was considered a little too transgressive, so instead of pitching to multiple publishers, running the risk of rejection, Steve opted to start his own graphic novel label with Arcane Comics, and his career took off from there. This is huge because when you own your work outright, you're effectively shielded from corporate entities who often want to water your work down to sell more copies or mold your material into the mainstream. This mentality is a slow death for most artists. So whenever you can, keep things punk rock and do things yourself. Number 3, KISS. Keep it simple, stupid. Steve has collaborated with some of the greatest minds in horror, including Rob Zombie, Sam Raimi, Clive Barker, Wes Craven, and John Carpenter. One of the things he's learned from them all is how the strength of their ideas usually lie in their simplicity. They collectively have relatively simple concepts when you think about it, which allows their work to truly sing, since it's not weighed down by complicated story elements. This is a big trap that a lot of writers fall into. Brimming with ideas, most writers want to pack their stories full of multiple concepts, storylines, and endless amounts of details, only to distract and disengage the reader with a bloated storyline. Simplifying, on the other hand, allows nuances like the artist's style, vision, and world to shine through, since it's not bogged down by overly complex details. Simplicity, however, is not easy to come by and actually requires more work than complexity. As the old saying goes, perfection is achieved not when there's nothing more to add, but when there's nothing left to take away. So heed the advice of the masters of horror as you're developing your stories. The simplest distillation of your idea is usually going to be the best version of it. Anyway, guys, thank you as always for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, why not share it with your friends and family on social media? Don't forget to follow the show on Instagram at I'm Nick Taylor. That's I am Nick Taylor, and on Twitter at the same handle. Thanks again for listening to the Nick Taylor Horror Show.